Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take you back to a moment I'll never forget. I was sitting on my bathroom floor, knees pulled to my chest. Tears I didn't even try to stop. I felt broken. No roadmap, no answers, just fear. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you're there right now. It's that kind of moment where everything feels heavy and you can't quite see past the fog. Your mind starts spinning stories, some loud, some quiet, but all of them point to the same terrifying thought. What if this is it? What if I don't recover from this? What if this is the moment everything falls apart for good? I know that feeling intimately, and if I'm honest, I wanted to outrun it. I wanted to slap a quick fix on it, a new plan, a new distraction, a new version of myself that wouldn't feel so fragile. But here's what I've learned about comebacks. They don't start with fixing. They start with facing. Facing what's true, what's raw, and what's real. Because pretending we're fine doesn't make us stronger, it makes us stuck. And being stuck is the thief of every dream we have left inside us. I had to learn this the hard way. I kept thinking I could avoid the pain if I just stayed busy enough, if I worked harder, if I kept moving, but pain doesn't disappear because we ignore it, it waits. It waits until we're finally too tired to keep running, and then it demands to be felt. And the truth is, the only way to start a comeback is to let yourself feel it. I'll never forget the moment I let the tears fall and told myself, this is where I am. This is what I feel. And it's okay, it wasn't a declaration of defeat, it was an act of courage. Because naming where we are doesn't mean we're staying there, it means we're finally willing to face it. And facing it is the first step to freedom. Maybe you're here today with your own story. Maybe you're the one holding the broken pieces, wondering if it's even worth trying to put them back together. If that's you, I want you to know this: you are not alone, you're not the only one who's fallen, and you're certainly not the only one who can rise. What I learned in those first few days is that comebacks don't start with answers, they start with questions. Honest, uncomfortable questions. Questions like, what am I afraid of? What is this pain trying to teach me? And what is still worth fighting for? I remember asking myself, what if I don't get back up but that question? It's the wrong one. The real question is, what's worth getting up for, what matters enough to try again? What dream, what person, what purpose is still calling out to you, even in the dark? And maybe the most important question of all, what would it look like to believe I'm still worthy of something good? Those questions aren't easy. They ask us to sit with discomfort, to lean into vulnerability, and to stop running from the truth. But they also do something powerful. They remind us that no matter how lost we feel, there's still a light inside us. It may be small, it may flicker, but it's there. And the moment we stop hiding from ourselves, we start finding our way back to that light. For me, that moment on the bathroom floor wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning. It was the day I stopped pretending I was okay and admitted I wasn't. And you know what? It didn't make me weak, it made me brave. So if you're in that place right now, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me. You don't have to have it all figured out to start again. You don't need a perfect plan, a foolproof strategy, or even a guarantee that it'll work. What you need is one moment of honesty, one decision to stand in your truth and let yourself feel whatever you're feeling. That's the first step. That's where courage begins. And if you're willing to take that step to stop running, to face the fear, and to let yourself feel the weight of it, I promise you something. It won't break you. It might bend you. It might stretch you. But it won't break you. Because what's inside you is stronger than anything that's happened to you. I didn't know that at first. I thought I was too far gone. But the truth is, we're never too far gone to begin again. We're never too broken to heal. And we're never too lost to find our way home. So take a deep breath. Let yourself feel it. Name it. Own it. Because your comeback doesn't start when you've got it all figured out. It starts right here, in this moment, with one brave decision to face what's real and believe in what's still possible. This is where we start rebuilding piece by piece. And it begins with one powerful truth. You are not defined by this moment. It's so easy to believe that our lowest points are the full story, that the failures, losses, or setbacks we've experienced are somehow proof that we're not enough, that we're too weak, too broken, too far gone to rise again. But here's what I need you to hear today. Those moments don't define you. How you respond to them does. When I was at my lowest, I kept replaying the same narrative in my head, the one that said I wasn't strong enough to handle this. I felt stuck in my own fear, paralyzed by the idea that maybe this time I wouldn't find my way back. But I've learned something about resilience. It doesn't show up when you feel strong. It shows up when you feel scared, uncertain, and exhausted, but you still choose to stand up anyway. Resilience isn't the absence of struggle. It's the decision to keep moving through it. And courage. Courage isn't waiting until the fear goes away. It's showing up in the middle of it. It's waking up and deciding, today I'll try again. But let me be honest, this part isn't easy. It's messy and uncomfortable. It's full of doubt and frustration. And it requires something we don't often talk about, self-compassion. Because you can't rebuild your life if you're at war with yourself. I spent so much time being my own worst critic, beating myself up for not having it all together, for falling apart when I thought I should be stronger. But what I didn't realize then was that self-criticism doesn't make us tougher, it makes us smaller. It keeps us stuck in shame instead of moving toward growth. And if we're going to make a comeback, we have to trade shame for grace. So this is where I want you to pause and take stock of your inner dialogue. What's the story you're telling yourself right now? Are you giving yourself permission to be human, or are you expecting perfection? Because let me tell you, perfection is the enemy of progress, and progress, not perfection, is what builds comebacks. I want you to think about what it means to stand in your own corner, to be the voice that says, you're doing better than you think. Keep going, because sometimes that's all we need, one small reminder that we're still in the fight. And speaking of fights, let's talk about grit. Because grit isn't just about perseverance, it's about purpose. It's about having something bigger than your fear to fight for. When I was in the middle of my own comeback, I remember asking myself over and over again, why does this matter? Why is this worth it? And I'll be honest, there were days I couldn't answer that question. Days when the fear and fatigue felt louder than the hope. But then there were moments, small, quiet moments, when I'd remember who I wanted to be. Moments when I'd picture the people who were counting on me. Moments when I'd feel that tiny spark of purpose flicker back to life. And that's what kept me going. Not the promise of an easy road or a perfect outcome, but the belief that even if it took every ounce of courage I had, it would be worth it. So here's what I want you to do right now. Stop focusing on how far you have to go and start focusing on the next step in front of you. That's it, just one step. Because every comeback starts with one small act of bravery. Maybe it's getting out of bed when you'd rather stay under the covers. Maybe it's making a phone call you've been dreading. Maybe it's asking for help when your pride is telling you to handle it alone. Whatever it is, take the step. Because action doesn't just create progress, it creates belief. And belief is what fuels resilience. I'll never forget the first step I took in my own comeback. It was so small it almost felt ridiculous. I made my bed. That's it. I told myself I can do this one thing, I can do the next thing, and day by day, step by step. That's exactly what happened. So don't underestimate the power of small actions. Don't wait for motivation to show up before you move. Move first, and the motivation will follow. Because every time you take a step, no matter how small, you're building something bigger than momentum. You're building trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in your ability to rise. Trust in the truth that no matter how far you've fallen, you're never too far gone to rise again. And that's what this part of the journey is really about, reclaiming that trust, reclaiming your belief in yourself, your ability to rise, and your worthiness of something better. It's not about having it all figured out. It's about deciding that you're worthy of trying. And that's what I want you to hold on to right now, not perfection, not certainty, but the simple truth that you're worthy of the effort it takes to rebuild. Because you are, no matter what's happened. No matter what mistakes you've made, no matter how many times you've fallen, you are still worthy of standing back up. So stand up scared, stand up tired, stand up unsure, but stand up and know this: you're not defined by this moment. You're defined by what you do with it. Now we're halfway there, and it's time to rewrite the story you've been telling yourself. This is the part where we face the narratives that have been running in the background, those quiet, persistent voices that shape how we see ourselves and what we believe is possible. If you've ever heard yourself say things like, I'll never recover from this, or I'm not strong enough to handle this, then you already know how powerful those voices can be. They don't shout, they whisper. But they whisper so often that we start to believe them. I know this because I believe them too. I told myself I wasn't enough, smart enough, strong enough, worthy enough. And guess what? That story kept me small. It kept me playing defense, hiding from risk, and avoiding anything that might remind me of my fear of failure. It felt safer to stay there, in the shadows, than to risk being seen and getting hurt again. But safety doesn't lead to growth. It leads to stuck. And the longer I stayed stuck, the louder those voices became. It wasn't until I really sat down and examined the stories I was telling myself that I realized something important. Those stories weren't facts, they were fears, and fears are only as powerful as the attention we give them. The moment I started questioning them, they started to lose their grip. I asked myself, is this true? Is it true that I'm not enough? Or is it just a belief I've carried for so long? that I don't know how to put it down. And maybe that's the hardest part, letting go of a story that's been with you for so long it feels like part of who you are. But here's the thing, we don't have to erase those stories to rewrite them. We don't have to pretend the hard parts didn't happen. What we have to do is give them a different ending. So I want you to think about the story you've been carrying. Maybe it's a story about failure or rejection. Maybe it's a story about not being good enough or deserving enough. Whatever it is, I want you to write it down. And then I want you to ask yourself, what's the truth I want to believe instead? Not what feels safe, not what feels easy, but what feels true to the part of you that still wants to fight. When I did this for myself, my new story wasn't grand or perfect. It was simple. It said, I am allowed to rise even after I fall, that's it. No guarantees, no promises of perfection. Just permission to keep trying. And I wrote that down. I put it on sticky notes. I read it out loud until I started to believe it. And slowly that belief turned into action. But here's the thing, you can't just write a new story once and expect it to stick. You have to keep rewriting it over and over. Every time the old story shows up, and it will show up, you have to remind yourself that it's just a habit, not the truth. And habits can be changed. I remember one day, not long after I started this process, I looked in the mirror and said the words out loud, I am enough. And it felt ridiculous. I laughed at myself because it felt so foreign, like I was trying on someone else's clothes. But I said it again the next day. And the day after that. And what started as a whisper slowly grew louder. And that's what happens when we rewrite our stories. At first it feels forced, but over time it starts to feel like freedom. The tricky part, though, is that our old stories don't like to go quietly. They fight for space. They try to convince us that it's safer to stay small, to avoid risks, to keep hiding. And some days we believe them. Some days we let the fear win. But that doesn't mean we failed. It means we're human. What matters is that we don't let those days define us. We don't let the old stories have the final word. Because every single time we choose to speak a new truth, we chip away at the walls that have kept us stuck. And eventually those walls start to fall. I'll never forget the first time I felt that shift in myself. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was subtle, like something inside me exhaled for the first time in a long time. And that's what I want you to know. This process isn't about sudden transformations. It's about quiet revolutions. Little moments where you choose to believe in yourself just a little more than you did the day before. And those little moments add up. They build momentum. They create cracks in the lies you've believed about yourself. And those cracks let the light in. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. It's uncomfortable and exhausting. And there will be days when it feels like nothing is changing. But here's the truth. Every single time you rewrite your story, even if it's just one sentence, you are teaching your brain to believe something new. And that is powerful. Because here's what happens when you change your story, you start to see yourself differently. You start to show up differently. You start to make decisions based on the belief that you are capable, not broken. And when that happens, the world around you starts to respond to that version of you. I remember the first time I walked into a room and didn't shrink. I didn't over-apologize. I didn't second guess whether I belonged there. I just stood in the truth of who I was becoming. And it wasn't because the fear was gone, it was because the fear no longer got to lead. That's what rewriting your story does. It doesn't erase fear. It reminds you that you're stronger than it. It reminds you that you get to decide what happens next. So if you're still carrying an old story that says you can't do this, I want you to hear me loud and clear, you can. Not because it's easy, not because it's guaranteed, but because the act of rewriting your story is the bravest thing you can do. And bravery, no matter how messy, always leads to something new. This is where we stop planning and start moving. Because comebacks aren't built in your head, they're built in the real world. It's so tempting to stay in the planning stage, isn't it? To write out lists, highlight strategies, and feel productive without ever actually taking the first step. I get it. Planning feels safe. It feels controlled. And after everything you've been through, control can feel like a lifeline. But the truth is, no comeback happens without action. At some point, you have to decide that you're ready to step into the arena, even if you're scared, even if you're not ready, even if your knees are shaking. The first step is always the hardest because it's the one that breaks the inertia. It's the one that says, I'm not staying here anymore. I'm moving forward, but here's the secret no one tells you. Momentum doesn't come from confidence. It comes from courage, and courage isn't something you feel first, it's something you do first. You act, and the confidence follows. I remember when I was at one of my lowest points, I had this overwhelming urge to fix everything at once. I wanted the big win. I wanted the dramatic change that would make it all better overnight. But I learned something valuable. Comebacks aren't built in big, sweeping gestures. They're built in small, deliberate steps. The kind of steps that might look insignificant to everyone else but feel monumental to you. My first step wasn't glamorous. It wasn't bold. It wasn't something anyone would write a movie about. I made my bed, that's it. I stood up, pulled the sheets tight, fluffed the pillows, and told myself, this is what control feels like. That one small act reminded me that I could do something. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And once I did that, the next step didn't feel quite as impossible. So maybe your first step looks different. Maybe it's making a phone call you've been putting off. Maybe it's opening your laptop and updating your resume. Maybe it's going for a walk just to remind yourself what movement feels like. Whatever it is, don't underestimate it. Don't dismiss it because it feels too small. Because small steps, repeated consistently, turn into momentum. And momentum is magic. Once it starts, it's easier to keep going than it is to stop. The hard part is getting over the initial resistance, the voice that says, what's the point? That's the voice that keeps us stuck, that convinces us to wait until we feel more ready, more sure, more prepared. But the truth is, readiness is a myth. No one ever feels 100% ready to change. If you're waiting for that feeling, you'll be waiting forever. I remember how many times I told myself, I'll start tomorrow, always felt safer, but it also kept me in the same place. And the more I waited, the harder it became to believe that change was possible. Because every day I didn't act was another day I reinforced the story that I wasn't capable. That's the danger of waiting. It strengthens the belief that we can't do it. But the opposite is also true. Every time we act, even if it's a tiny act, we're proving to ourselves that we can. That's what builds trust in ourselves again, action, not thought. So instead of asking yourself, can I do this, start asking, what can I do right now, not tomorrow, not next week, right now. And let's be clear, taking action doesn't mean you won't feel fear. You will. Fear will show up every step of the way, whispering reasons why you should turn back. But here's the thing about fear, it's loudest right before a breakthrough. So if you're scared, that's not a sign to stop. It's a sign you're getting close to something important. When I started taking action in my own life, I felt fear every single day. I second-guessed myself. I wondered if I was making the right choices, but I kept moving. Because what I learned is that fear doesn't disappear the moment you start. It quiets down when you keep going. And you don't have to go fast, you just have to keep going. Some days, progress might look like crossing big things off your list. Other days, progress might look like getting out of bed when you wanted to stay under the covers. Both count, both matter, because consistency is what builds resilience. And let's talk about resilience for a second. Resilience isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up every single time you do. It's about refusing to let failure define you and choosing, instead, to let it shape you, to let it teach you. I remember one day when I took what felt like a huge step forward, only to face a setback that knocked the wind out of me. It would have been so easy to give up in that moment, to tell myself that it wasn't worth it. But then I remembered something. Setbacks aren't signs to stop, they're signs to keep building. So I picked myself back up and I took another step. And another. And that's the thing about comebacks, they're built in the moments, when you feel like quitting but decide to try anyway. Action isn't about perfection. It's not about getting it right the first time. It's about showing up even when it's messy, even when you're scared, even when you're not sure what the outcome will be. It's about trusting the process more than the result. Because the process is where you change. The process is where you rebuild the parts of yourself that were shaken or broken. It's where you remember you are not in theory, but in practice. And that's what makes action so powerful. Every step you take sends a message, not just to the world, but to yourself. It says, I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm still willing to believe in what's possible. And over time, that message becomes louder than the doubts. So don't let fear convince you to wait. Don't let perfection keep you stuck in planning mode. Take the step. Take it scared. Take it messy. Just take it. Because the comeback doesn't happen all at once. It happens one step at a time. And this is where we keep going, where we make the choice to show up again and again, even when the excitement fades, even when a road gets hard, even when no one is watching. This is where we learn that the real power of a comeback isn't in how fast we rise, but in how committed we are to keep rising. It's easy to feel motivated at the start. There's a spark, a fire, and it's tempting to think that energy will last forever. But what happens when it doesn't? What happens when the adrenaline fades and you're left with the slow, steady work of rebuilding? That's the moment that separates the dreamers from the doers. That's the moment that tests whether this comeback is just an idea or something you're truly willing to fight for. And here's the truth about comebacks, they're built in the unglamorous moments. The moments when you feel like quitting. The moments when no one is cheering for you. The moments when you have to pick yourself up off the floor for the 10th time and decide, I'm not done yet. I've been there. I've had mornings when the weight of everything felt too heavy to move. Days when the voice in my head whispered, why bother nights when I lay awake wondering if it would be easier to give up? But what I've learned, what I know to be true, is that the hard days aren't signs that you're failing. They're signs that you're becoming. Becoming the kind of person who keeps going when it would be easier to stop. Becoming the kind of person who fights for what matters even when it's hard. Becoming the kind of person who knows that setbacks aren't the end of the story, they're part of the story. And this part of the journey, it's not about being perfect, it's about being consistent. It's about showing up when you don't feel like it. It's about trusting that the small, invisible steps you're taking today are building something bigger than you can see right now. When I think about my own comeback, I don't think about the big milestones first. I think about the tiny moments when I could have stopped but didn't. I think about the nights I stayed up writing a plan even when doubt was screaming at me to quit. I think about the times I kept going, not because I wasn't scared, but because I was scared and still chose to move forward. And that's what I want you to remember. It's not about moving fast. It's not about doing it perfectly. It's about doing it anyway. It's about showing up when no one's clapping. It's about trusting that effort, even when it feels invisible, is never wasted. Because what you're building right now isn't just a comeback. It's a foundation. A foundation that can withstand the storms. A foundation that can hold the weight of your dreams. And foundations aren't built in a day. They're built brick by brick, layer by layer, choice by choice. And every choice matters. Every time you choose discipline over distraction, every time you choose courage over comfort, every time you choose faith over fear, you're adding another layer to that foundation. I know it's tempting to focus only on the big finish, to dream about the moment when everything falls into place and the struggle is finally over. But the truth is, there's no finish line when it comes to growth. This process doesn't end when you reach your goal. It's something you carry with you long after the comeback is complete.